Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. It's 10:12 a.m., getting a little bit of a late start following our joint session with the Grays Harbor Commissioners. My name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board. To my left, Commissioner Carolina Mejia and Commissioner Emily Klaus, Commissioner Rachel Grant. Also with us virtually, County Manager Leonard Hernandez, Assistant County Manager Josh Cummings. Public virtual attendance available on the Thurston County YouTube channel. Written public comment may be received by up to 2 hours in advance of the meeting and will be distributed to the Board of County Commissioners. Action may be taken at this meeting. We have 3 substantive topics on this morning's work session, all fairly significant. The first is a State of the Utility presentation from the Lot Clean Water Alliance. We have Matt Cannelli, Executive Director for Lot, and we're pleased to have him with us to kind of give us an overview of what's going on at Lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Menser. Thank you, Commissioners, for having me. It's that time of year where I reach out and ask if I could get some time to update you all on what we're doing at Lot, Clean Water Alliance. So I have some slides prepared to walk through. Feel free to stop me at any time or ask me some questions at the end. But basically just giving you an update on where we are and where we're going. So overall, I wanted to share our role as our regional wastewater utility, how we've been doing on our performance, the community connections that we try to make as we continue to meet our mission of cleaning water, as well as making sure that we are prepared and planning for the future. And as our community grows, Lot will be able to handle that increased wastewater flow and treat that to high standards. As an overview, LOT stands for Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and Thurston County. We have 4 elected officials on our board, of which you recognize our president, Chair Menser, here. And we meet monthly to go over business. Our mission is to protect public health and the environment by cleaning water and restoring resources for our community. So a bit of history on LOT that you may or may not know. We're actually formed in 1976, so we're almost about 50 years old as an organization, but in 2000 is when this new interlocal agreement was signed, which really that's the LOT that we look like today. Because in 1976, it was an entity that paid the city of Olympia to run all the treatment services. Our main plant was built in 1951, the city of Olympia was running it, and so the cities of Lacey and Tumwater, as well as Thurston County, got together, formed this entity a lot. They're just a handful of employees for a long time, until the early 2000s. So you can see kind of how the logos changed over time. But here we are 25 years later, and we're planning for another 25 years into the future and making sure that we can continue to maintain that positive trajectory. We have about 140,000 people that we serve. The ratepayers actually serve through the cities. So the cities build the collection pipes in the cities that connects the homes and the businesses and the industries. And then we take over when those pipelines combine or at certain, pump stations, things like that. There's about 10% of county residents that are served by LOT. It varies from time to time because as the cities are expanding into the urban growth areas, the cities are responsible per the Urban Growth Act to be able to serve those communities. And so depending on annexation and all that, it kind of varies. But you can think about 10% of your residents here in Thurston County are ratepayers of LOT.
Which I had Matt run that number when we were talking about the estuary and the impact and all of that on county residents.
Yeah, it was a good exercise to kind of take the latest poll of it all. So our main treatment plant in downtown Olympia, that one that I said was built in 1951, is our Bud Inlet treatment plant. We treat about 13 million gallons per day of wastewater flow at our main plant. So the analogy I like to use for 13 million gallons per day is if you take a football field and build a 4-story building on it and fill the entire thing with raw sewage, right? That entire volume is what we're responsible for making clean and safe for the population as well as the environment. So it's broken water that we're cleaning up and making safe again.
Per day?
What's that?
Is it per day?
Per day. So that entire volume per day.
Football field.
Four-story building on a
Four-story building on
football
top of a football.
So that entire volume. That's 13 million
I
gallons.
should create a graphic for that.
Yeah, I actually tried to create a graphic, but I need our graphic designers to help. I thought maybe waving my arms around is a little bit better.
That's significant.
Yeah, that is significant. Yeah, and so it takes a lot of infrastructure to make that happen. And we have this major process upgrade that we recently completed, do a high level of treatment. But all told, with the other infrastructure that we have, it's about $1 billion of infrastructure that we're responsible for maintaining and upgrading and making sure that we keep up with existing regulations and make sure that we build as the community grows. We're very highly regulated, so that comes from the EPA down through ecology. We have a whole series of permit requirements on what we need to clean the water up to the levels to discharge, but also there's a variety of other things like samples and other things that we need to take in order to comply. There's also an EPA requirement that you have to plan and maintain your infrastructure. You can't just let it go and say, oh, we need to upgrade. Like, you actually have to show that you're planning for that growth and funding it, or the EPA comes or ecology will come and make you do it. So that's our approach to really doing this high level of treatment to maintain that, to meet up with that EPA requirement. So how we've been doing over the last year, and if you go to our website, but I also brought some copies of this 2024 report, that if you see that basically we outline our performance, and number one objective on this list is achieving permit compliance. I mean, that's our mission. I'll share with you the other things that we're doing, but meeting permit is our number one goal, and we achieve that 100% for the discharge requirements that we have. So on the back of that handout that we have, this is our annual mailer, kind of some fun numbers we like to share. In the green bottom left, second from the bottom, 4.46 billion gallons of wastewater. I don't have a great analogy for that one, but it's a lot of water. And you can see the number of samples, 23,000 plus samples that we have to take. So just to give you a scale of the work that we do with our 91 staff members. We continue to have 0 instances where permit limits were exceeded, so we're very proud of that, as well as doing the highest level of treatment on Puget Sound. So there's 57 other treatment plants on Puget Sound that do similar work to us. We've been doing high level of treatment since the 90s. The ecology came with the way we discharge into Butt Inlet, so it's an impaired water body. So we have this high level of treatment required. We're also very proud that we've been able to meet that for 3 decades plus, and continue to do it at rates below the average. So it's a good value to our ratepayers. We also receive major awards, and when you have 4 project awards and you have 4 board members, you can take fun photos like this and share them. But basically, very proud of all of these, but the one at the bottom's fun because that was a national award from the American Council of Engineering Companies. Basically, any project in the entire world can be submitted to this group. So think about consulting engineers and designers. And we were one of the top 8 projects in that the entire nation that was submitted. And these are like New York transit projects that are flashier than a treatment plant upgrade. But it was fun, black tie event, Washington, D.C., that kind of thing. So it was really fun to take the victory lap on this big upgrade that we did. We also reuse resources, so biogas, that's the methane that comes off the process. We capture that and power part of our plant. We heat our buildings. We actually provide heat to the Hands-On Children's Museum across the street from that. We also reuse the biosolids. That's a solid material that comes off the process. And that's part of a program in Eastern Washington that is a farmer-led program with King County, where instead of using anhydrous ammonia, which is that wheat head on the left, they use biosolids, that's the one on the right, to produce that dryland wheat. So nitrogen, phosphorus, moisture, things like that are good in that material is why they want to use that product. And then water reuse. 13 million gallons a day on average are coming down our plant. We produce about 3 to 4 million gallons per day between our satellite facility and our main facility. That's used for irrigation and an offset. So drop for drop, you can use reclaimed water for anything other than drinking or bathing. And so the golf course, for example, in Tumwater uses 600,000 gallons per day of reclaimed water. So that's potable water supplies, drinking water supplies they do not need to use. And then when we build new infrastructure, we try to have this community connection. So the picture in the upper right is a tank that we had to build, a 1 million gallon storage tank to feed the Tumwater golf course because they use so much water in a given day. And so we feed that tank over time, and then they use that instantaneously throughout the day to irrigate the golf course. But we worked with the city of Tumwater to come build a park on top of it that overlooks the Deschutes Valley. Or when we infiltrate groundwater out in our Hawks Prairie, Lacey area, we open that up for a public park. Citizens can come and use that for free, bring their dogs. Audubon Society uses it frequently. As well as in front of the Hands-On Children's Museum, we have a recreational water feature showing the value of reclaiming water. And then when our main administration building was built, our board had the foresight at the time to say, hey, let's build a science center and show people the value of water and what we do here at Lott. So we bring school districts through. All 3 school districts come through, about 3,000 students. So North Thurston, Olympia, and Tumwater, because they're in our service area. About 12,000 people were able to reach through this program. They just learn about water, learn about what we do. It's about being transparent to the ratepayers in the community about the work we do. Also, just removing barriers for certain school districts that have to hire subs or can't afford buses. We fill that gap to make sure these programs are continuing.
Can I say real quick, when Matt and I were at a conference a couple of years ago, and there was this big room, all these like agencies from all over the country, and we're kind of brainstorming on ways to tell our story better and how to connect the community. And people were like talking about this like as a possible, they were like describing exactly what the wet center is like, this is something we could do and we could think about. And I'm like, man, go up to the mic. And like, we did, we did exactly what like these agencies were like sort of talking about as a future thing. And I think people were pretty surprised.
Yeah.
You got a lot of like people that wanted to see what.
Right.
And then later on, we actually submitted that, didn't we? As like,
yeah, we submitted it. Yeah, and we.
The next year.
Won awards for that project. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's awesome.
And then from a community approach as well, we're thinking more holistically about water. And so, water conservation is still important, but thinking about water quality overall is important. So I like showing this pie chart because it's from the Department of Ecology, and it shows the impacts to oxygen depletion in Bud Inlet. And you can see the Bud Inlet treatment plant is 3% of that picture. And I'm not showing that because that's not, we still need to focus a high level of treatment, and we need to continue to do the good work we're doing. But it's part of a larger picture of water quality, and Capitol Lake is 62% of that impact. And the external sources are what's coming down to us from the north, so those other treatment plants that discharge. Local non-points, things like septic tanks, runoff, things like that. And so we have at Lott a very comprehensive view of this. This is why if you get at, why is Lott involved in Capitol Lake Deschutes Estuary? Why is Lott doing septic to sewer conversions? It's part of this larger picture, and we've shared that with our regulators at Ecology, and they get it. And rather than tighten Lott down from 3% to 2.9% and spend hundreds of millions of dollars, right? We're focusing in these other areas. So trying to spend money wisely. And that's allowed us to develop stronger relationships with the Squaxin Tribe, for example. We signed an accord with them in December where we're jointly focused on water quality projects. So where we've positioned ourselves at Lott is being on the same side of the table with Ecology, the tribes, and all focused on water quality, and not, be just trying to have our own interests at hand. We're all working towards the same goal, which wins awards when people see that type of collaboration, that gets picked up in the news, that shows the community the kind of thinking that we're doing and evolving as a utility. That's why we're involved in septic to sewer conversion rebates. So 50% of connection fees that lot has, we discount to try to encourage folks getting off of septics to sewer, as well as affordable housing. Because as affordable housing, more of that comes on the market, you have movement in the housing chain, and you get people out of the encampments and through, and so you're basically helping protect water quality in that way as well. And the last one I'll share with regional collaboration as it relates to Thurston County too is the regional climate goals and benchmarking against 2015. So I'm proud to share that over time, since 2015, we've been able to make a 30% decrease overall in our carbon footprint. And that's because the grid has gone a bit greener over time, so that helps, but we made dramatic reductions in our power usage and other chemicals that we use that have a big carbon footprint. But then if you think about all these people have been moving to town since 2015, so I like to calibrate it against that and say we actually have a 42% decrease per capita for the changes that we made, and so we're continuing to stay at it. So last thing I'll share with you is how I want you all to know that as the community grows and you all are making growth decisions, LOT will be there to respond to the growth with that close collaboration on planning. So how we do that, we do this annual planning with the cities and involved. We look at how much flow is coming in. We measure flow out in the system. We do capacity assessments. We assess all of our 5,000 pieces of equipment that we need to maintain, and it comes into our budget. And we make sure that we're adequately funding that with the help of the board and these very consistent rate adjustments to keep up with inflation. Then we, live under those means and adjust projects and adjust our priorities to make sure that we can continue to build as we need to, including staying at these big capital projects. So I don't know if you've seen this big crane over downtown, kind of down the peninsula. That's this project, this digester upgrade. That's the structure, one of 4 that produces methane and biosolids. You can get a scale for how big these projects are when you see the people working on the cover structure of this, but it's a $34 million project, so it's a big lift. We have low interest loans from the state for this, but we need to stay at these projects, and this consistent funding of our utility allows us to stay at these big projects. This particular infrastructure was built in the 1980s, so it's definitely due for an upgrade. As well as looking at future technologies, because we run a pilot team of our staff. They carve off time from their regular day jobs to test out new technologies and make sure that other new technologies we can employ that be more cost effective. Some we try out and don't work, and it's okay. Rather than put them in full scale, we try them out, see if they work, and then many projects ultimately become worthwhile to get on our future capital improvements plan. One exciting one is relating to water reuse. So I mentioned before how much we can reclaim water and reuse it, but in our area it can be somewhat limited because it's wet in the winter and you're not using reclaimed water to irrigate. The 2-pipe system approach, where you have the purple pipe of reclaimed water and the regular drinking water pipe, it works for big infrastructure like going out to a golf course or wherever we have these main pipelines. But the days of thinking of where everybody's house is going to be piped up with 2 pipes has shown itself throughout our country to really not be feasible long term, because you're really managing 2 water systems. So what we're thinking at LOT is, okay, 20, 30 years in the future, where is all this trending? And we think about climate change and you think about all these things that are coming, really taking water to the next level and really unlocking that is where the future is going for one slice of the larger water picture. So that's why at LOT we're going to do a drinkable water demonstration. So potable water will be the first in the state to do this. There's sort of regulations that allow it on a case-by-case basis. It's been done around the country. It hasn't been done in Washington State. But our goal really is to share that water should be judged by its quality and not its history. And when you demonstrate that you can basically take water all the way to that cleanest standard that we have for drinking, now it unlocks you to use it however way you want to use water. And it'll be up to the future to determine that. But similar to reclaimed water, how that's had to be proven over time, right? We've been doing it a lot for 15 years. That's our idea here, is to prove it and show it for another 15, 20 years. And then the cities and the county can determine what you would want to do with that as part of the larger water picture with groundwater, reclaimed water, and now this new source. So that's what we're working on. We have SPSCC brewing and distilling program, so they're gonna brew beer for us, have a fun event. This will be sometime next year. Just basically just having fun and demonstrating it, and not connected to any pipes, whatever. This is just at our plant, kind of batching the water. But the tribe's on board, a large coalition. It's very exciting. And then I'll finish too, that we have plans for the future. So as we look out that another 25 years, look at infrastructure. We're not planning on building new treatment plants. We are focused on high level of treatment at our main plant, because we've shown with that new technology that we can achieve those levels. And it's all about regional collaboration. So that's with, even before this meeting, we were talking about how we can more regional collaborate for water supplies, resilience, water quantity, water quality. All of that is more contemporary thinking, and where I'm happy that Lot is with the jurisdictional partners and working on that together. So we're selling off some properties that we no longer need, including a property that we sold to the city of Lacey for affordable housing, and a property in the Deschutes Valley, so the Brewery Valley, that Lot owns property, if you've seen that. We're selling that to Tumwater here soon. And I can't forget the staff that make it happen. It's fun to find some photos of the dirty jobs that we do, but also there's a lot of clean jobs. We're in our construction, water quality, maintenance, those type of things that we have all told have about 91 staff getting it done. We have a really positive culture, very low turnover rates, really proud of our innovation and problem solving, just a very technical workforce that we consistently want to invest in. And ultimately, that's what's going to get us from here through 2050, is staying adaptable, being innovative, making sure we have that commitment to our mission and nexus of water quality, look for ways to help the community within that, and then also community support. And that's part of what I like to be able to share, and why I appreciate this platform to be able to share it, because I want to share the work that we're doing and achieve that community support. So thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions that you have.
We're right on time. We have time for a few questions, if there are any from the commissioners.
No, I don't have any questions. This was a great presentation. It's always great to get these updates and kind of see. And Commissioner Menser, he keeps us updated as well.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a really good organization to be part of. The day to day, what the board does is that slide that Matt showed of the capital projects of the digest. I mean, we spent a lot of time contracts and planning, and we get regular updates on these big capital projects. That's kind of what that's the core work of the organization, and where the board plugs in. We did strategic planning this last year. We always have budget, which keeps us busy, but ultimately, there's a lot of things where we look to our bigger counties and, Pierce and King and Snohomish, we're like, wow, wish we had the resources to do what they're doing. This is a place where we don't say that. We don't want to be like them. We like what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're really, I think, on the forefront of what this area, can look like. And I think they look to us more than we look to them, it feels like to me. And it's really interesting to go. I've gone a couple times to a national conference where you can see things are done so differently. I was on the lot board for 3 or 4 years, just only knowing how we did it here. And it was really eye-opening to see. I mean, Central Florida is all reclaimed water, and Los Angeles is doing this crazy stuff. In Michigan, they're working on PFAS in a very innovative way. There's a lot of issues that are handled. Biosolids are handled very differently in different parts of the country. So it's just, it's a really interesting area of local government and governance and stuff. So I think we can be very proud of our local agency.
I'm excited about the beer.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Commissioner Mejia has already got the logos or the slogans ready.
I don't know, it's in the water,
It's
right?
the water, right?
Like it's tomorrow's water, that's it.
All right, anything else for Matt before we let him go? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up is our CPED staff with our second, I believe it's second, right, Ashley? 2025 periodic comprehensive plan review, rural land use and zoning is the subtopic, which is a big one. And if you guys could give me 1 second to open the new page, because this is a separate topic. Let's see.
It's kind of neat, the last two work sessions, we're following on the heels of very big picture thinking presentations that do a nice job of setting the stage for the board's consideration of comprehensive plan update.
Let's see. Land use. Okay, Ashley, I'll just pass the baton to you.
Yeah, so we're back. I'm excited to be here. Ashley Rye, Community Planning and Economic Development Director, and I'm joined by Derek Day, our Community Planning Manager, for a second in a series of 7 30-minute briefings before the board on the topic of our comprehensive plan update. Given the amount of time that we have, we're not going to recap what we covered last week. It was a general overview of comprehensive planning here in Washington and what that looks like here in our local region and what we've been doing for the last 2 or so years. For today's briefing, we're going to go ahead and start zooming in on our first topic, which is rural lands and land use. And so most of today's content you'll see in the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan, but these chapters don't exist in silos, so there are some connectivities that you'll see with our natural resources and environment chapters and housing and whatnot. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Derek. We're gonna tag team like we did last week, and we're happy to answer questions if they come up during the briefing.
Thank you, Ashley, and we appreciate the time to talk about this. Again, exciting project. Really like to get to work on this. Don't want to overpromise here either. We're not going to dive too deep. This section of the comprehensive plan really is the foundation, but it's pretty big picture. It doesn't dive into some of the details that the other sections dive into. It's really more spatially about where we grow and how we grow in those different spaces. So it starts with growth trends for Thurston County. Thurston County is projected to grow by approximately 30% over the next 20 years. And this shows kind of how that growth is expected to kind of fall across the county and our neighboring jurisdictions or city partners. Most of the growth really is going to be concentrated in the cities. That's what we would expect. A lot also in the urban growth areas of Lacey, Tumwater, the Grand Mound area, Olympia as well. And then as projected, we're projected to see about 12% of the growth in the greater county area falling within the rural county.
So team, I know we don't want to dive too deeply in the last presentation, but just for the commissioners, clearly, the joint plans that we have with each of the cities is where we cover the growth trends mostly with the UGAs, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then the rural county, that 12%, that's really the meat of what we're talking about with these topics.
Yep, that's primarily our purview as a county with the Grand Mound UGA. That is not a city-associated UGA.
That's great, thank you. So Grand Mound UGA 2%, rural county 12%. Those are the growth areas that we're looking at for the next 20 years.
And, following up on what Derek said, so we're projected to receive 12% of the growth. That is based on historic building trends. Where this board will be able to make policy decisions is what our future looks like. So even if that is the projection, that can move, that could expand or shrink based on policy decisions that the board takes up. Is part of our comprehensive plan update and something our planning commission and community has been talking a lot about.
Are you saying the joint plan takes the place of the comp plan
Doesn't
for
take-
UGAs?
It doesn't take place.
No, it sort of is supplemental. And so the joint plan in this county, where we have joint planning, is the policies that are in there are more reflection of an expectation that it'll be more urban in nature. So our comprehensive plan is very rural, those set foundational policies. And then supplemental to that, we do these joint plans that are also going to be a little bit more nuanced. So the Lacey joint plan isn't going to be the same as the Tumwater joint plan, recognizing that growth is not going to look the same for every UGA.
I understand the joint plans, but I guess my question is, does our comp plan, does it address the UGAs in some way, or does it tend to?
Those are separate planning efforts.
Yeah, it does not address, in some of the policies, like our transportation policies are regional. So you've got pieces of our comp plan that look at the whole picture. As it relates to land use, this chapter, it is only outside the UGAs with the exception of Grand Mountain.
That's an important distinction, because when you get information from constituents about X, Y, or Z topics, focusing on what the staff is talking about is going to be really important.
And I also want to reiterate, so when we look at that 12%, Ashley mentioned that, it kind of presumes that there isn't this whole practice of land use planning. It's kind of the natural trajectory, and we do have the opportunity to inflect that trajectory. And a lot of the feedback that we heard was in relation to like the sustainable Thurston goals and finding ways to get from that 12% to something that looks closer to that sustainable Thurston goal of 5% of the projected growth falling in the rural areas.
And this is probably going to be one of the biggest policy decisions the board gets to consider. So you'll see it pop up in quite a few of the presentations.
Yep, this is a meaty one. So there are a handful of different requirements for the land use element. The land use element really addresses a set of challenges that are pretty different from what we see in the cities. The RCWs really push us to look at designating rural lands. So that's rural residential, that's lands for natural resources, for farming, kind of all of those rural uses that we think about when we think about out in the county. Economies, open space. We also, this is where we kind of define and work towards protecting rural character. So we'll hear about rural character when people are thinking about development in the county. This is really where we define it, what that character looks like. And we can be held accountable to maintaining that rural character, but rural character doesn't have a universal definition. We define it. We also try and prevent sprawl through logical land use patterns. So not putting high density things out in the middle of nowhere, if you will. Also, this is where we think about where we extend and how we extend utilities, trying to really make sure that those are in places where the densities can actually maintain and so we can serve more of the sorry, I cannot think of the word I'm looking for, but to serve the denser development patterns, not sending utilities way out into the county. So we also want to look for supporting rural economic development, it's agriculture, forestry, and mining. This is also a space where we look into innovative zoning techniques. This is where the land use planners get really excited. To preserve open space and resource lands. We also coordinate with adjacent jurisdictions. We talk about our joint plans here, and then also we think about compatibility with military installations like JBLM. So, and when we lay out kind of all of this planning and all of these land use designations on the map, they look like this. They're pretty diverse. They have different uses in different areas. We can see where they intersect with the cities. We can see some of the impact of some of the other land uses, like military land uses. These also this is the future land use map, and this really tells us kind of what we should expect for these different designations across the landscape.
And zoomed out it this way, I'll just give you a quick tip. If you see yellows and oranges on a map like this, they're usually going to be residential. If you see greens, it's your open space, forest, ag lands. Reds, pinks connote commercial, and your purples are usually industrial. And so you'll see in a rural landscape, most of it is in the yellows and the greens, and that's your rural land uses, your farms and forestry. You see very few purples, because of course those are your, industrial uses. They're gonna need utilities, so they are usually located within a city, or at least a UGA like Grand Mound. And you also don't see a lot of pinks and reds, and that's really that difference between your urban areas where you'd see a lot more of that versus your rural areas. So think of our economic drivers as the greens for our natural resource lands.
Just, I don't want to get in, but that purple chunk right there where, on I-5,
That's the Maytown. So we're not proposing any changes. That is what the existing land use map has. But
one of the proposals was to change the zoning in that upper left corner to,
there was a proposal for the docket,
Is that to
an
expand
applicant initiated, to expand, make that purple bigger.
bigger. Okay, 'cause it's
Was
like-
the proposal. So what you see here is just what's currently designated, so no changes to the map. However, as Derek will get into, we have had a lot of comment about, even within the purples that we have here in the county, what should be allowed in terms of uses. So we'll touch on that, because that is one of the policy questions that'll come before the board.
So we've heard quite a lot from the public on this element. One of the major comments and themes that we've heard is really reducing that rural growth down to 5%. That's been a pretty consistent theme. The Planning Commission has put it into their recommendation draft. But that is, again, probably one of the bigger policy questions that we'll get to grapple with during this update.
Just one thing, if it's okay if I, on that point, so the board did direct staff to work with TRPC to really figure out this question: can the cities accommodate 95%? The answer is yes. So that work was done, and the cities and UGAs could accommodate 95% of the growth. The question is really what to do with all the extra capacity that we have in rural areas. Because we have a lot of capacity for development in the county.
Can you explain that a little bit?
What do you mean, what to do with it?
Oh,
Why does it
sorry.
help
So if you look at
do anything with it?
If you look at the entire region, we'll essentially have the capacity for like 107% of the growth if the cities plan to be able to accommodate 95%. So there's essentially an excess capacity above all of the regional need. And in the county, it's that like 7% difference.
But to Commissioner Minster's point, we don't necessarily have to do anything with it.
No, we don't have to do anything.
And we as the board.
Yep, the board doesn't have to implement any policies that would change the capacity. The capacity is what it is. It's the existing lot configuration, the number of lots that exist in our rural residential zones. So there are a number of policy considerations or strategies that we'll present, but they are all options. There's no external requirement from the state to change that. We're okay. So it's really it'll be a local decision.
And how's that interaction with the cities about them taking on the 95%?
So they,
Do they have
over the
plans
last,
for that?
I'm sorry?
Do they have plans for that?
They do. So they implemented a lot of changes coming out of Sustainable Thurston, and they're continuing to implement changes to comply with state law. And so we essentially worked with TRPC and the cities to do a capacity analysis to make sure if they were, could they accommodate the growth? And the answer was yes, that it's not a question of, hey, cities, you need to make changes so that we have less growth in rural areas. They've already made those changes. It's whether any of the capacity has been taken off the table in rural areas, and it hasn't. We still have the same capacity we did when Sustainable Thurston was down, or largely the same. I mean, there have been some
It'll just
changes.
last longer. It can last for the next comp plan period.
It could last, yeah, it could last longer.
There's no reason to
Yeah.
change it because we'll need it eventually.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different, you know, looking at what are you really trying to get at with capacity? Is it minimizing impacts on the environment? Well, there are other strategies you could use. That aren't even capacity related. So it's a lot of stuff to chew on, and we can definitely dive in as we get into the housing, but we want to at least get it on your radar. We know it's going to come up. It's come up at almost every meeting with our planning commission, so that you can at least start thinking about it. We also put resources on this sheet, so if you want to start doing reading on your own, they're available there too.
All right. Some of the other comments that we've heard are about using climate data for future land use decisions, making zoning and development able to support equitable, or making it equitable and able to support healthy outcomes for all communities. There is support for limiting the types of warehouse, or ensuring that there's a nexus to natural resource industries for our rural natural resource-based zoning for industrial. And also we've heard a lot about language to address wildlife habitat corridors. So those have been kind of the big themes that we've been able to pull out of the public comment and have guided the current draft that we have. So things that Thurston County is doing to lead the way. We've already moved forward with a draft that restricts some of the rural resource industrial lands to ensuring that those uses have a natural resource nexus. We want them to be able to support our timber, our mining, our agriculture. That's really the direction that we've taken so far based on some of that public comment. There's a goal currently in the comp plan. It's not necessarily a policy. There aren't implementation actions associated with it. It's not necessarily reflected in the zoning, but there is a goal to work towards limiting that 5% growth over the next 20 years. So to Commissioner Mentzer's point, if we're trying to keep capacity, we don't eat it all up in the short term and then have to find more. So finding ways to encourage it.
So this is an opportunity to kind of just keep putting those pieces on the table, right, for the commissioners to have an understanding.
Yep.
Okay, so we have the capacity, and what we've heard is that the historic trends would demonstrate that it's a 12% growth in the rural area. And that is based on market, where people want to live, right? So that may or may not happen. Right now, we have the capacity for it to happen. What the staff is saying is, you've got this goal that you've been talking about and hearing about of 5%. And what are you gonna do to affect those market trends potentially, to take that 12% and bring it down to the 5% and go a slower growth pattern out into the future? So just, they're providing you with the what, and the question that's gonna be to the board is the how, and if you really wanna do that. And so these are as you're thinking about these topics, that's where this is all heading towards. And you're gonna get, and you're gonna get community feedback in lots of different directions. And I want to make sure that the board is prepared to receive that, because we've been saying this is a big deal, and that's why it's a big deal.
Because you're gonna have one constituent group that will wanna try to meet that 7% to get to 12%. Market growth, builders, et cetera, say, hey, we're ready to go. And if we say we're gonna get to 5% and implement policies that affect that, you're gonna have those folks very frustrated, which will further the narrative that Thurston County is the worst place to build because of having to work with the county. So that's why we're bringing these to you in these snippets, because that's the balancing act that we have to do. And that's the work that then hits staff on the back end of, why can't I do this? Why can't I build? And it'll become a point of frustration.
Commissioner Fournier's hand is up.
Derek or Ashley, are you able to put like 5 or 10 or 12% into numbers?
I think
Or did I miss that slide?
12%, I think, is right around, just over 11,000,
11,000 units?
11,000 residents.
11,000.
New residents in the rural area.
Yeah, I know that one off the top of my head. So. Yeah,
And what I've been directing my team to do is we're here to provide the range of tools. So if you're hearing community feedback, constituent feedback, that we'll be here to sort of outline tools, and, you know, and what it would mean essentially if those tools got used. So we're prepping that right now. And so we're just, putting these markers down, as Josh said, so you can start thinking about it. But we'll definitely be back with more information. So you'll have more context.
And I think just
But-
to, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, to the county manager's point, but there'll be, based on these shifted targets, there'll be accelerated development within urban areas, including RUGAs, which hopefully our permitting processes will be fair and reasonable and fluid. And if somebody wants to take a position that Thurston County is a bad place to do business or develop, that's going to be based on our protection of rural areas. It's not really going to be true across the county. They're going to be able to work within the UGAs and the cities, hopefully, as well as they can work anywhere else. But we will have a philosophy that our rural area, we have to remember, we are on the border, like we are the wall of Pugetopolis. And it's right around 93rd Avenue, right? Like it's urban from here all the way up to Bellingham, and it stops. And that's, I think, what 90% of Thurston County residents love about Thurston County is we have a truly blended geography and culture, so it's my belief that we are unique in the state of Washington in having extreme growth management pressures and responsibilities on our shoulders to maintain the character of, like, no county is under, I think, as intense pressure to maintain its character and historic culture and characteristics as we are. So this is really important work and conversations.
Well, thank you for that, Commissioner. And as staff, we're here to present you the facts as they stand and the tools, but it's really the board that provides that direction on the character of the county.
And then as a county manager, what I want to try to do is to take the board's direction and clearly communicate it to the community so that our staff, who are inundated right now with a misunderstanding from our builder community, that it's somehow their fault that they're not able to do what they want to do in the rural areas. And the complaints primarily come from the rural areas. Complaints that amount to preoccupying staff's time, and it's not just one source. So where there's narratives from established groups of stakeholders that come to the county and say, Thurston County is the worst place to do business and get permits in, we have to turn that around and say, just what you said, if that's the board's direction. No, this is by design because we are protecting that rural character and creating what we want to see in Thurston County. It's intentional. And if you want to develop, here's where you need to develop, because out in these other areas, it'll become extremely limiting. And that's, I think, to Josh's point about you can't just set that goal and then not affect it with policies that enable to slow it down, because it's not us driving it, it's the market that's driving it. People move here wanting to live there, well, at least 12%. And so over time, that 12% year after year will change that character, intentionally or unintentionally.
And there's one thing that I would share, because anytime I meet with a developer or a consultant who works in multiple counties, I never miss the opportunity to ask, if I hear that Thurston County is the worst place, is that true? You work in multiple counties, and 100% of the time, they say, 100% of the time, they said, no, you're kind of about the same as the other counties. So it's a completely false narrative that we're somehow the worst place to do. That is just, basically it's folks that are only work in this county and they encounter obstacles like they would encounter anywhere else, and they draw the conclusion that it's got to be better elsewhere. The grass is always greener. But to the folks that are actually eating the grass in the various counties, the cows that are there, I've heard 100% of the time that we're not better than other places, we're not worse, we're kind of about the same. So I just want to share that because I always want to ask that. Commissioner Fournier.
A couple things. I think there's also different constituent groups that we're talking about. Like the seasoned developer, you're right. Like they easily roll it in, these things into costs, and they plan it out. But from my experience talking with constituents, the people that have difficulties are the lay people. The everyday person. I was just talking to one the other day that was having struggles with some permitting folks because they were being told they had to plant vegetation on somebody else's property, and like they don't, they're unable to like kind of, meet the needs that we set forth sometimes. And it's the lay person that, in my experience, that has the biggest difficulty. And they're the ones that are going and saying that we're the worst county to develop in. And they don't necessarily, and they might be speaking anecdotally because they spoke to somebody in Lewis County that didn't have the same experience. So, I think there are stories out there that we should be listening to. Something that we've got like two competing like goals here, and to understand that dynamic, I'd like to ask for help with is, we're trying to, preserve things, but we're also acknowledging that we need more houses and we need to, kind of not put additional pressures on the housing market, or be careful what we limit because it drives up prices. And then, the difference between 5% and 10% is 5,000 homes, which in a county of what, 300,000 people, that's not a lot spread out across 800 square miles or whatever we are. So like, I don't know. I'd like to learn more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And the way I think about this dilemma, just to kind of maybe wrap it up a little bit, is there are a whole handful of tools. There's also timelines that we can think about. So like how fast would we want to move? And there's a whole range of these tools that go all the way out from the most kind of draconian, which would be like downzoning, enforcing, deparcelization, like that's really, really heavy-handed, all the way to kind of a wait and see what happens with the cities opening up more capacity. And then as you kind of like step out that gradient, there are a lot of things that are really not as heavy-handed that we might be able to, again, kind of inflect that trajectory really kind of, honestly, kind of elegantly. And the other thing I think about is the difference between how we develop and where we develop. And what that does for protecting resource lands, the environment. The land use section is really about where we do it and at what densities. And then there's a lot of follow-on later that is about how we do it. And that's what people usually experience when they show up at the permit counter. So those are kind of different tools that we have to kind of manage growth in different ways and the impact of it. So a little bit of planner nuance.
Before you jump, what is military compatibility?
Military compatibility ordinance. So this is a recommendation for an ordinance that basically puts different development regulations around JVLM, so that it's more compatible with the base. So there's quite a bit in that actual ordinance.
So we've had staff coordinating directly with JBLM and other jurisdictions that share a border with our military installation, and a lot of it has to do with flight paths and things like that. So it's really just clarifying for people who live next to JBLM what they can or cannot do. A lot of times they don't find out until they come in for a permit, and JBLM is just they're one of the agencies that submits comments. And so rather than it coming just through comments on individual permits, this is a way to get it in our code. So it'll just improve transparency and clarity for those property owners.
Actually, because Josh highlighted, from your perspective, how important is this item right here?
The military competitive,
No,
I'm sorry.
The new goal.
I think it's the biggest policy decision in the comprehensive plan update.
And what's your take from hearing from folks that touch CPED in our community at their frustration level? And what are you hearing as a director?
As a director, I would say a lot of it is focused on less on the land use piece and more on the critical areas ordinance. Not to jump ahead to future docket, but it's the how, as Derek pointed out. And so our code right now doesn't really talk about limiting growth, so that would be a new one. But what our code does do is make it very difficult to navigate how we protect our critical areas, and doesn't necessarily reflect best available science.
Yeah, and I think, Board, that's where, because I don't want to create a situation where staff are in the vice. And the amount of work that I've seen over the last several months that comes through a number of different stakeholders. And Assistant County Manager, you see the emails come through. I don't believe that's an exaggeration. Would you agree?
Correct, yeah.
And as a new director,
There's a very high level of frustration.
so that's what I'm saying, Chair, that we have an opportunity to change that from a frustration to communicate and help folks understand that what we're actually doing and why we're doing it, so that can be a positive and not necessarily in a reactive environment where then they're coming because there's so much staff time being spent on the lack of clarity that some of our code provides. And I'm watching a new CPID director sometimes get inundated with that workload. Would you say that's correct?
That is very correct.
So just kind of broadcasting that this process is, as you said, Commissioner Mentor, probably one of the most important things, this and budget, most important things that county commissioners touch. And the ability to have a vision and express that vision and communicate that to our community, especially the different stakeholder groups, that what we're doing and why we're doing it is a powerful opportunity.
Thank you for highlighting that, County Manager. The CAO, their critical area ordinance, the complications, and I think Commissioner Fournier kind of talked about it a bit tangentially, is the administrative complications that are written into the CAO. And so I think that if you're thinking about protecting the environment, there are ways that can be done that also reduce the frustrating administrative work that's currently in the CAO. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, County Manager, because that will be something that staff has been directed to work on by the board, and we'll be bringing that back to the board.
And again, the big policy questions. So I don't think we can stress this enough. This is really these are kind of the critical policy questions. First is that rural resource industrial, and whether or not that should be limited to industries with that natural resource nexus. And then again, and I really like to think about this as like trying to chart a path towards 5%, as opposed to like, how do we do 5% right now? Like, it's going to be difficult. And the other piece that, as a planner, I find really exciting is we might be able to find ways to get to 5% while also making it easier from the administrative side. So people might have a better permit counter experience, and we might be moving towards that 5%. There are ways, very likely, to do that.
That would be the goal.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Because then that would accomplish.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I have supported, Josh can back me up, I've supported almost every, like, process-related reform effort that his department and now Ashley's department has engaged in because of that very thing. Like, I don't want it to be, the rules, whatever we decide the rules are, they need to be, people need to have timely responses and accurate responses and have a good permit counter experience, even if the answer to even if it's no. It should be a quick and easy and streamlined no, so they can move on and figure, and like Commissioner Fournier said, like, the big players, they know exactly how to navigate that and, where they can put their efforts so that they make profit and they can continue to do projects. Nothing undermines support for the rules as quickly as a poor process, that unnecessarily undermines support for what might be a rule that we could all get behind. So, I mean, I'm all for those types of things, making sure that, and I like what Derek's suggesting, that we have a continuum of pathways or continuum of tools, less heavy-handed ways to maybe achieve our goals. I want to hear all of that, because that's definitely what I'm looking for.
And there's a lot of new emerging technology, there's new science, and so we'll bring that forward to you as well. So things that the tools that used to be in the toolbox are no longer the same tools.
Yeah.
They've been augmented. And then just really quick for context on that first one, so you think about the purple that's on the map for rural, our rural land use, there isn't a lot of it. So the conversations with the Planning Commission have really been about, do you reserve that purple for our natural resource-based industries versus having it get eaten up, let's say, by a more traditional warehouse distribution facility? So focusing the intention of the purple dots on the map.
And
And we'll be back next week.
yes, we will. Looking forward, we will actually do a deeper dive into capital facilities, utilities, and transportation. So,
Okay, thank you, guys.
Talking again.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, we're gonna take a minute or two to shift gears. Next up is a housing topic, home fund overview. Let's just give ourselves a moment.
Still coffee available.
Yep, there's still coffee. I mean, actually, if we could take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I actually need to run to the restroom.
No problem.
Commissioner Mejia needed to go grab her daughter, so we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes.
Sarah, please help yourself some coffee and water. Yeah, Tom?
No.
Some coffee.
I'm sorry. It's the name of the shoes. Interesting.
Okay, it's 11:20. We are back for our morning work session here, July 23rd. Item 3 is home fund overview. We have Tom Webster here from Public Health and Social Services. Straight to Tom?
Not quite straight to Tom.
Okay.
As part of the direction that the commissioners gave, they asked us to reach out to the BHASO to be part of the conversation. Joe Avalos was unavailable due to a work commitment, but he allowed his key staff member to join us, Tara. I'll let her introduce herself. And so what we thought we'd do is just start off with a high overview from BHASO as to what funding is available. Now, there's been discussions about different funding sources and opportunities, and we've been encouraged to have a connectivity, but then also bring that back to commissioners. And so with that, Tara, I'll let you introduce yourself and your role. Start by providing some opening comments.
Great, thank you. My name's Tara Smith. I'm the finance director for the Thurston Mason Behavioral Health Organization, Administrative Service Organization. We have a very long name. So just a really brief overview. In 2020, the state law changed, and the funding that was received by the previous behavioral health organization was a mixture of state funding and Medicaid funding. So in 2020, the state direction was to take the Medicaid funding and shift that to managed care organizations that provide physical health and have them administer the Medicaid funds for behavioral health as well. And so as the ASO for Thurston and Mason regions, our main contract is with the State Healthcare Authority for non-Medicaid funding for low-income, non-Medicaid individuals and indigent individuals. So our budget, our annual allocations are around $12 million through that main contract. And about $6 million of that is what they call GFS, which is grant funds state dollars. And those are considered our flexible dollars. They aren't necessarily targeted to a specific legislative priority, proviso, or certain program or activity. So of that $6 million, there's 3 main contractual obligations that the ASO must implement using those dollars. And so those are population-based crisis services for both Thurston and Mason, and that's providing crisis response for individuals experiencing a mental health or substance use disorder event in the community or a hospital may be called to. The other thing is involuntary hospitalizations related to mental health or substance use disorder. If someone is, if it's decision that they're needed to be detained to inpatient treatment. And then paying for the involuntary treatment court costs for both Thurston and Mason County for those cases for people who have to go involuntarily to the hospital. So of that $6 million of flexible funding, we have budgeted about $4.4 million total towards those activities. So about $1.2 million goes towards the crisis services, and that's blended with Medicaid funding that comes to the ASO. It's the only Medicaid funding that we receive, and it's to go for those population-based crisis services.
If I could ask, so
Yeah.
there's no other Medicaid funding that is available to the ASO?
Not to the ASO. So the managed care organizations do contract with other community mental health and substance use disorder providers for Medicaid services in our community, but those are direct contracts and don't come through us. So about $1.2 million goes towards the involuntary treatment court costs, and that's both for Thurston and Mason courts that happen here to detain people, but we also have to pay for individuals from our region who are detained in other counties. So we get billed by other ASOs for those costs. And then the involuntary hospitalization costs, we budget about $2 million for that per year. So that takes up quite a bit of that flexible funding. With the rest of that funding, there's about $1.6 million. Some of that goes to the administrative overhead for the ASO to operate and employ the key necessary staff to implement the contract obligations. And then we have, I'm trying to think here, I think we have 14 main network providers who we contract with in Thurston and Mason counties to provide non-Medicaid, medically necessary treatment services for mental health and substance use disorders. And so we have those contracts in place as well. So that really takes up a lot of the flexible funding. We have a lot of braided funding. And I say that because we receive TST funding from the county that supports mental health services, substance use disorder services. That's braided with Medicaid and other non-Medicaid funding to keep services whole as much as possible.
Do you see any capacity there, or ways in which the county and the ASO could work in closer collaboration to better utilize funding or get access to more funding?
I think that we are working on a couple different projects, and that the braided funding that we have in place now is working well, and it has been able to increase capacity in a lot of ways. What there isn't a lot of capacity for is to funding that could be diverted, say, to case management services for other housing projects. A lot of the funding, again, that we receive is very targeted. So there are case management services available through Medicaid and non-Medicaid treatment providers, but the limitations on that is the services have to be provided through a licensed behavioral health agency. And then an individual has to engage in treatment and be eligible for that treatment, meet medical necessity, and they would have a treatment plan. Case management services would cover many different dimensions of their life. It could include housing, but it's not dedicated to housing. There are 2 other grants that the ASO receives that are specific to housing supports and rent assistance. One of them is housing and recovery through peer services, and that's another healthcare authority grant that's outside of our main contract. That's very, again, specific to an individual being referred, being found eligible. It comes with peer services through that contract, and then a housing subsidy that's a short-term subsidy for 3 months. And so that's a service that is contracted to our direct service side, the Olympic Health and Recovery Services. It doesn't allow for necessarily contracting or carving out funds for doing outside other contracts for case management per se. Our other housing grant that we receive is Community Behavioral Health Rental Assistance, and that's through the Department of Commerce. And that comes with no case management dollars. It's implemented for a long-term rental subsidy for individuals who qualify. And a limitation of that is that there's not case management services. So again, people have to be eligible, income-based, being released from an institution, whether it be a community mental health hospital, substance use disorder residential treatment, or the jail. So.
Anyone's head ready to explode yet?
It's a lot of
Commissioner
information.
Fournier, I see your hand.
I just wanted to kind of acknowledge or, try to make sure I understand what I'm hearing. We're having, other conversations around this issue and, trying to understand the use of our local home fund dollars and how obligating those certain places is going to, make it more difficult for us to respond to other emerging kind of needs that are really being highlighted by reduction in state dollars. And, one of the big needs is some of the transitional kind of encampments in Olympia are losing funding for case management and operations services. One of the suggestions or one of the questions was, are there funds available other places like through BHASO or through the state that we're not tapping into? And I think I heard you answer that, but I just wanted to make sure that I asked it very pointedly and gave you an opportunity to answer it again.
The answer would be no. There's very targeted dollars for certain programs. There's the homeless outreach stabilization program to host. They do go into encampments, but again, that's very targeted. It includes a medical component. But through our contractual obligations with the state and how the dollars need to be used, I don't believe that we have any other discretionary funds that can be used to divert to contract with other housing providers potentially for some of that work. I think always open to referrals to our providers who are providing these services and outreaches and using resources in that way. But again, it's more targeted towards an individual being referred for the program and wanting to participate versus a provider necessarily receiving a lump sum of funding to be able to use more flexibly to meet needs.
Tom, not to put you on the spot, but from your perspective, being in this space for quite a while, do you see any funding that the county isn't utilizing with the BHASO or ways that we could be more effective there?
I'm not aware of any funding that is available. I think right now, there's actually pretty good communication between our office and our providers and host and some of the outreach from BHSO they coordinate. I think in our 5-year plan that we're talking about, we are looking for ways to make sure we're maximizing that coordination between resources. One resource that is available that is Medicaid is called Foundational Community Supports. And so our providers tap into that. That can be a supplemental resource to help with some case management. It's not a standalone funding source that you can run a program off of, but it's a way that some of our providers can receive some extra additional funding to support case management activities. So we're looking at ways to make sure we're maximizing those resources. So I'm not aware of anything that would be kind of a standalone to fund a program, but just looking to make sure we're maximizing the coordination and leveraging of existing resources.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate Tom bringing up the foundational community supports. That was on my list as well as an opportunity for housing providers to tap into. And it's very true. It's a fee-for-service reimbursement model for a set of services, so it doesn't fund necessarily a position. But it can be, like you said, a supplemental to help.
State money?
Help fund. It is a state Medicaid program through WellPoint, formerly known as Amerigroup. It's a managed Medicaid care organization, and they have the statewide contract for that.
I know you and Joe recently met with the sheriff's team and specifically the Chief Hofta from Corrections. You've been able to ascertain, is there any funding that we, the county, the sheriff office, that we're not taking advantage of, that if we worked together in partnership, we possibly could take advantage of?
There have been some other opportunities to participate in some demonstration projects that would be Medicaid funded. And that, again, is through the Healthcare Authority. They're somewhat at risk right now because we don't know what's happening on the Medicaid side federally, what will continue to be funded, and demonstration projects are usually time, sensitive, 2 to 3 years, seeing what outcomes are. And there were also, I believe, some barriers, and it being a demonstration project, not a lot of answers for some of the questions raised around how to provide the services, especially in a jail type setting, using the Medicaid dollars, data collection, infrastructure that would be needed. And a lot of those demonstration dollars may go towards infrastructure development, but then not be funded long-term. So I think there were some barriers around that. There's not any other grant opportunities that I'm aware of at this time besides that one, and it was kind of a phased approach. They had like different rounds where people could opt in to apply for that. I think I don't know how many projects statewide that are happening through that, but it seemed to be a barrier, some barriers in place.
in your conversations with our sheriff's team, you identified any different approaches that would free up funding to fund potential positions within the corrections service?
Not at this time that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There are some opportunities for community-based crisis response, for co-responder teams and endorsed teams that, as an ASO, we're pursuing, that would not necessarily replace any funding, but expand the capacity to a 24/7 model for those crisis services and co-response in the community.
Well, again, thanks for being here. Give our regards to Joe.
Thank you.
I've heard lots of wonderful things that our ASO is doing in Thurston County. Commissioners, back to you. Any other questions?
For Tara?
Yeah, for Tara?
Questions for that, for Tara?
So
Nope.
we'll go ahead and jump into, feel free to, you can stay at the table or sit in the audience. The choice is yours. We're glad to have you. I think it's good for you to hear this part of the presentation as well. Tom, I'll hand over to you.
Great. All right, thanks.
Thank you again, Tara.
Thank
Is that-
you.
Now for the next slide.
Down for the next slide. Great, thank you. TA. All right, so here to present kind of a big picture overview of our homeless services funding, and then focus in specifically on our local home fund and the encampment resolution funding. So gonna focus, again, homeless services, so we're not talking about our affordable housing dollars, the capital dollars here. But so for our homeless response system, really we have three main sources of funding. We have our local funds. Those are our local home funds. They have some limited restrictions around housing-related services. 5386, this used to be known as 2163. They changed, they consolidated all the document recording fees into one piece of legislation. So 5386 funds are document recording fees that we keep locally. Some of the document recording fees go to the state. The allocation of those must be in alignment with our 5-year homeless response plan. And then we have a human services fund, which is a sales tax that Thurston, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater impose. It's 1/10 of 1% of the local sales tax, and that is used for social service activities. So those are the local funds we have available. And then our state funding, most of it comes under the Consolidated Homeless Grant, or CHG, and those programs must follow the CHG guidelines. And within that master contract, there are several sub-funds in a sense. So those are the standard CHG funds, the Housing and Essential Needs Fund, which is specific to a specific population, Homeless Prevention, which was previously the Eviction Prevention Rent Assistance Program, so that is for rent assistance activities, Emergency Housing, Inflation, and a Supplemental Document Recording Fee Fund. So all those make up the state funds we receive under the Consolidated Homeless Grant, and those must follow the Consolidated Homeless Grant guidelines for how those are spent. And then the second source of funding we receive from the state is that Encampment Resolution Program fundings. Those are outside of that CHG. They do not necessarily have to follow the CHG guidelines. Commerce is kind of pick and choose some of the guidelines that we have to follow, but that essentially is a separate source of funding from the state. So within that, over the last 3 years, this table shows how much money we've received and allocated under each of those different sources. So you can see in the 23-24 year, that totaled about $18.5 million. In 2024-25, that bumped up to a little over $22 million. We received, most of that was really some additional funding that came from the state under the CHG grants. And then this year, our current funding is just under 21 million. So we are seeing a decrease of about 1.5 million in the total amount of funding we have for our homeless response system.
Before we move on, I think this is a great overview. Thank you, staff, for putting together. So give commissioners time to absorb this, and if you have any questions, just let me know, and we'll work with Tom and the team to provide any type of additional background you need on these revenue sources. Tom, how do these revenue sources these last 3 years compare to maybe several years back? Have you been receiving more funding
Yeah, and so I would say pre-COVID, our total funding was around probably the $6 to $7 million range. And then with COVID, we saw really a substantial increase, especially the rent assistance money was, we received $50 million total that we spent over a 2-year period. So that really kind of changed. And the state also stepped up. And then with the local home fund resources. So we went during COVID 21, 22, we were probably in a $35 million range annually. A bulk of that really was the rent assistance dollars coming from Treasury. And so now post-COVID, we're settling into this range of kind of that $18 to $20 million range.
So you almost had like a 5-time increase during the pandemic. Now you're down to 3 times what you were pre-pandemic dollars.
Correct. All right, so getting a little more specifically around the local home fund, and I know you know much of this, but just as a reminder, in 2018, Olympia voters passed their own local home fund, which is a 0.1% sales tax. That became known as local home fund in 2018. And then in 2022, the board passed the ordinance imposing that sales tax throughout Thurston County, with the exception of Olympia and the city of Tenino. That passed their own tax. And then in December of 2022, Olympia and Thurston County signed an interlocal agreement that combined the local home funds. And so City of Olympia agreed to contribute 65% of their home fund tax collection for affordable housing projects, and that was to be transferred to Thurston County. And then that ILA also calls for the decisions on the use of those funds to be managed through the Regional Housing Council for the use of the local home fund. So I know this slide is a little small, so sorry it's a little difficult to read, but you asked for funding on how the local home fund has been spent. So this table is on the capital dollars. So this is combining both the capital dollars from Thurston County's home fund as well as City of Olympia's contribution to the home fund. So you can see these have been ranging from, a little over 6 million to, 4.5 million per year in terms of allocations that we've had. So some of these projects are still, especially the 2025 awards, will be implemented and funded in the future. So these are the capital projects.
Before we move on, I don't know if there's any questions or anything the commissioners would like to highlight about this information. I think it's a good overview, but local home fund dollars have, from this chart from the last several years, done a lot of good.
And then the next slide is showing how we've allocated the local home fund dollars on the services side. So as a reminder, under the local home fund ordinance, 60% of the funds must go to capital projects, 30% may be used for housing-related services. So we are capped in terms of the amount of dollars that can be used for service-related activities. We integrate the local home fund with all the other CHG dollars in terms of how we fund our contracts, but this is the list of contracts that have been funded with the local home fund service dollars. So in these dollars, none of the Olympia home fund dollars are in these projects. This is all Thurston County local home fund dollars that are allocated to these projects. And you can see that's been about, kind of 1.5 million per year in that range that we have for services.
So, okay, hold on. So capital, let's just take 2024, whatever, 5.3. And then services, 1.5. So is that, how do we arrive at that breakdown between those two buckets?
So it is
certain amount have to go to capital? Or?
Correct.
Okay.
So all of Olympia's dollars go to capital, plus 60% of the county's contribution go to capital. 30% of the county's collections go to services, and then 10% we keep for administration.
I just want to add, as we're seeing some of these like capital projects, right? It takes years and one slide back, right? And so as we're looking at it, like takes years, and then a lot of these providers have leveraged dollars from the state, from federal sources, and so this 6.4 in 23, 5.3 and 24, and 4.5 and 25 is really like a small investment in the overall. And so this is basically, I know for Lansdale Point Apartments, they were able to leverage what we were able to provide for state funding. And I know that a lot of these other providers have done the same thing. They leverage local dollars and they go for bigger asks to the state and to the feds. And so some of these projects are coming on air here soon, and so they'll be available for our communities. And it's not something that you can just, fund and you're gonna see it the next day or the next year. Anytime when it comes to construction or improvements, it takes a couple of years to really come online. And so we're really going to start seeing those investments here soon in our community. And I think it's really important to kind of tell that story on how we've been able to use local home fund dollars to really leverage and create housing options for our community here locally.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a really important point because a lot of times the local dollars are the first dollars committed, because that's really important for the agency to then take that to the state. It makes their project more competitive if they see that local commitment. So a lot of times we're the first dollars to commit to a project that allows them to be more competitive at the state level for the Housing Trust Fund or low-income housing tax credits. So it does take some time before those projects come to fruition.
And a lot of times those projects are a non-starter if they don't get that funds out the gate. So they use that to leverage, like you said, Commissioner Mia, and also realizing that a lot of these projects, their performance are so like razor thin that money can sometimes be allocated to the due diligence process or whatever will be. It's an important investment in making sure things continue to flow through.
All right, so those are the local home fund. And then we've touched on a little bit the Olympia Home Fund dollars come through their RHC. And so just wanted to call out a couple things from the Regional Housing Council interlocal agreement, that the RHC is designated as responsible for making recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners on kind of all the funding that we're talking about here today, related to implementing the 5-year homeless response plan. And it states within the ILA that the BOCC shall give substantial weight and consideration to the recommendations of the RHC, but in the event the board deviates from that funding recommendation, that will be provided to the RHC, and the RHC will have a chance to revise that. And I think a good example happened this year with the Community Action Council. RHC has made a recommendation around funding for the Community Action Council. We brought that to you. There were some concerns, so we went back to the RHC, came up with a different plan, and then moved that forward. And then kind of just furthermore, within the RHC ILA, it calls for the creation of 2 advisory boards, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Homeless Services Advisory Board. And these boards have specific responsibility for making recommendations to the RHC on funding priorities, funding awards, and policy considerations for the RHC. Specific to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, because Olympia has funding that goes to those capital projects, at least 30% of that board must be made up of City of Olympia residents or folks who work in City of Olympia, so that they have Olympia. That was important for Olympia to have oversight in the use of their funds.
I think this is an important place to stop on just for a sec, because it highlights that there is structure that the Board of County Commissioners has agreed to on the way that the funding operates, that staff doesn't have the flexibility to shift and make choices, that this is a very prescriptive path. So I just want to make sure that the Board of County Commissioners is hearing that, is seeing that, and that Tom is here to answer those questions in terms of the structure. This is the way it's set up.
The next slide actually might be even better to see.
All right, and so here is a slide that shows the governance structure of the RHC. We have the RHC members on the left, where the elected officials are the voting members. Currently, the advisory board chairs serve as non-voting members of the RHC, and then jurisdictional staff are non-voting members as support. There is the RHC executive, which is the RHC chair, which currently is Commissioner Klaus and a vice chair, and then myself and support staff. And then the advisory boards, we have the technical team, which is made up of jurisdictional staff, which really serve as just making sure that what the advisory board is bringing to the RHC is in compliance with any state requirements, CHG guidelines. It's really there as a kind of a compliance check, just to make sure everything is in good shape for the RHC.
If I remember correctly, it's also in the ILA that the county representative will be the chair or vice chair.
That is correct. The county is the fiscal agent for the RHC, and that's why we manage the contracts. And so because of that, the county is required to be serving in either the chair or vice chair position. That's correct.
Thanks for pointing that out, Commissioner. Support.
Just another kind of element of how we structured the, balancing the different considerations.
And then this is an overview of the funding cycle. And I think this also gets to the challenge that we face of, in order to have contracts, especially for homeless services that start July 1 with the new state fiscal year, we really start in kind of October, November of the advisory boards, setting those priorities, making recommendations, and then going to the RHC to set those priorities, developing a request for proposals, which we bring to the board for approval, and then issuing that RFP in January this year. Applications we're doing in February, the advisory board score in March, going through this process to get to you hopefully in June for your authorization to execute those contracts. So going through that funding cycle, and I just want to point out that we did not receive our budget from Commerce until the end of May. So trying to manage this process with uncertainty around what our final budget numbers were. We had estimates and we kind of were following the legislative process, so we had an idea. And I know there was concerns early on in January of whether we were going to receive any right-of-way money at all. So trying to manage that process through this timeline, all these steps, in order to have contracts ready to begin July 1 is certainly a challenge. When we did not receive our final award amounts from Commerce until late May, and for the right-of-way, we did not receive our final amount until actually mid-June.
Commissioner Fournier.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to listen and keep up and kind of collect my thoughts. Like anytime I've ever said, hey, let's do this project, and it's a capital project, the answer is always, hey, it's never a problem to find capital dollars. It's always the problem to ensure that you have the ongoing operations dollars to maintain that capital project. And I mean, is there some misalignment here in that kind of theme where we've got capital dollars going out and then we've got operations dollars going out, but we're just doing this through RFPs where staff, I just heard that staff doesn't really have the ability to weigh in on that or direct how any of those operational dollars go out. So now we've got these capital projects that were built and we're unable to fund the ongoing operations of those facilities. Is that kind of the dynamic here?
I'll take a stab and then you fill. That's a great perspective, Commissioner Fournier. That always is the challenge. If you build something, then you have to operate it in perpetuity, and you have to make sure that you have funding sources to do that. I think that the context of what has created some pressure in this space is the decrease in funding from Commerce. So that's where, how many million?
3 to 4 million in terms of what's coming to the county and also Olympia, but yeah.
which is a significant amount of reduction.
I mean, that's one element, but I don't think we should have ever assumed that the state would pay for ongoing funding for these things in perpetuity.
I think that's a good perspective to have. You know, I'll look to Tom to speak to that, and maybe the other commissioners when the right-of-way initiative was established. What I've heard from the folks helping bring me up to speed is there was a lot of urgency when the right-of-way initiative was established to get things moving quickly. And so there was partnerships with the state, with the cities and the county to facilitate that. I don't know what the thought process was about long-term, what is the county or cities going to do if and when the state no longer is able to provide operational dollars to some of these sites. So your question, I think, is well placed, but I'll look to other commissioners.
Well, I'll just say that, you know, what we got was a humongous amount of capital expenditure and a promise of 3 year of operational. And from my perspective, that's all we could really expect. I mean, state government's not going to sit there, I don't think, and be able to say, we're going to fund this into perpetuity, like, you know, not knowing how, like, we got as good of an offer as we could, and there was no way we could leave those dollars on the table. So is it a roll of the dice? It's always a little bit of a roll of the dice when we're launching a project that's dependent on state funding. But we had every assurance that could have been expected at the time that this was a good gamble. We took that gamble.
It makes sense to me, but like what I want to continue to say is that written within that local home fund statute is language saying that, you know, these funds can be used in the event that, you know, the state funding you're getting decreases. So it's, you know, in my mind, the state, you know, like it was all mapped out. Hey, here's the emergency. We're responding to the emergency, but in the long term, you have to take this on as your own responsibility. And we've got the mechanism to do that, but we're in, you know, we're not, I don't know, maybe we're not engaging that, you know, with those funds in the way that we need. I don't know. I feel like we don't get the opportunity to have that conversation because it's just, you know, it's going out to, you know, it's just put out in an RFP by the RHC, and then, you know, they're funding those things, and those are important things too. But if it's not looked at in the greater context of what those funds need to be used for, then, you know, we might be leaving some people out in the cold.
Well, I mean, you've brought that up a number of times, and I'm glad that it's in there for our ability to use that, but it doesn't say the priority for these funds is to backfill reductions in state funding. It's just one possible use. There's nothing that tells me that what the state funded is more important than what we're funding. I mean, they're all projects in the community.
What I'm saying is we should get the opportunity to have that conversation, and we should be deciding on that. And I don't remember having that conversation. I don't know if that conversation took place. And, you know, like if that's our only chance to fund these operations, we should have that conversation before we obligate those funds. That's just what I'm trying to say.
I understand, and it's been the two wrinkle. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's not obvious, but the two wrinkles are the structure of the RHC and how we set them up to do that work for us, and this timeline that Tom's put together. I mean, look how complicated this is, like step after step after step after step after step. And as he said, when we get a change of information toward like May and June, how does this process even adapt to that? It's just not adaptable to that kind of a transformation. So, I mean, and that's created our frustration, but, you know, there is a reason why we set up the RHC structure the way we did. And, you know, maybe I'm more invested in it because I was part of setting that up, but you know, I think just because we've had a really unusual, frustrating situation this year doesn't, to me, say we upset the entire. It doesn't necessarily, maybe it does, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the structure is wrong or doesn't work 90% of the time.
And I think that's fair. But I'm also thinking maybe we reevaluate that.
And Chair, what I'd say is I really appreciate public health and social services work. Because even with this structure, our commitment is to get things in work sessions ahead of the time that groups are starting to work on them, so that you're aware and you can provide feedback and perspective. I don't know that all of this was set in place to the point where we could have activated that prior to this whole process starting back last year. Definitely was not. But we will continue to bring things forward where we know that there's regional decision-making, so that the commissioners can be aware. It's simply an update in a board work session that says this process is starting, this is what we're going to do, which will allow commissioners to jump in and provide perspective. And for the various commissioners that may sit on different boards and bodies to hear that, and if there's direction given, they can take that back and implement that.
I mean, Commissioner Mejia brought her, I mean, what you did, what to me is exactly like what should be done, right? You saw something in advance, understanding that we didn't know the final numbers, but you could see that there was a potential. You brought it to the board. We discussed a letter. We signed a letter. Now, maybe Commissioner Klaus, at RHC, I don't know how RHC handled the discussion about it, but, and maybe that's the issue is like, and Commissioner Klaus, I don't remember I don't even remember what your position was. You could have voted against the letter. I don't remember. But even so, if the board signed a letter, it would be, in my opinion, your job to take it to the RHC and say, hey, the county commissioners have provided this direction, we need to discuss it. And then you guys could have disregarded it, right? RHC could say, well, thank you, county commissioners, but here's our recommendations. But I don't see how we could have done any better than that, in terms of an issue that was coming, undecided, there's a timeline and process. The board did discuss, and we had a discussion right here in this room about Commissioner Mejia's proposal to give some preliminary direction to RHC on how to prioritize new funding, vis-a-vis the uncertainty about ERP funding. So I don't know. To me, it's like we did what we could do with the structure and the limitations that we had with not knowing what was going to happen.
And I would say we even adjusted our recommendation to the RHC to make sure we included funding to Unity Commons based on your comment, Commissioner Menser, of saying that was important to you. So the RHC, I think we took that feedback, we incorporated that, we made a recommendation to Commerce, hey, this is an important project, we wanted to make sure we put some money into Unity Commons, and then we got back in June, Commerce saying, sorry, we're not in favor of funding that project, so.
Cool, all right, we'll keep on going. Is there more?
A little bit more.
Yeah, you got a couple more slides. We're
So-
almost out of time, so we
Yeah.
should kind of get to the end.
So, and then moving on to the encampment resolution program funding, because this has been a little different than what's been done in the past. And so, July of 2022 is when this started. RHC submitted a proposal on behalf of the region. RHC recommends the funds to Commerce, but Commerce has the final decision on what it funds under this. And so it is not subject to coordinated entry requirements, so that's why it's kind of separate from our homeless response system. And so it's really operated kind of separately from our homeless response system. And then Commerce contracts directly with the county and the city of Olympia to implement those right-of-way programs. And then this is a table that shows what the recommendation for funding was, and that included the $200,000 for Unity Commons. It included $500,000 for Quinn Street, and then shows what the Commerce allocation was. Commerce came back, initially did not want to provide any funding to Unity Commons and Quinn Street, saying that those were temporary projects. And after some strong advocacy, they said, okay, we'll give you $100,000 to split between those two projects so they can essentially transition down and wind down. But that was the direction we received from Commerce after the recommendation to Commerce which we presented to you, I think it was in May, April or May, where we brought that and saying we know about the $5.5 million. We had the RHC kind of look at the big picture. We funded all the projects that were kind of the highest priority, including Quinn Street and some for Unity Commons. And then we received the direction from Commerce in June.
Commissioner Fournier.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate everything that is being said in your perspective, and I guess that kind of leads me to the question that I would want answered so that I can understand the RHC's recommendations and get behind them better. Is if our concerns were evaluated and discussed, and there was some rationale behind the funding decisions that were made for the service dollars versus maybe the kind of the soft guidance or considerations that we had said, hey, let's talk about. I'd want maybe a report out. It doesn't have to be at this meeting because we're kind of running out of time. Maybe we could have a subsequent meeting and get a report out from the chair on, you know, how it was approached, what was discussed, and maybe how the RFP process went out and why the funding recommendations were made for the service dollars versus supporting some of the ERP funding losses, if that's okay.
I'm sure we could do that at a later point.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, Commissioner, maybe later today, Commissioner check-in, or at a later point when Commissioner Klaus is more prepared to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I also will add to that, you know, when I give report outs on the Regional Housing Council meetings and how they go, you know, sometimes I'll just say, if there's no major updates, sometimes when we're doing report outs at business meetings, I'll just mention we had a Regional Housing Council meeting. Sometimes I'll give a really broad overview, like, hey, you know, applications have been reviewed or applications, we'll be seeing them come our way. I always encourage and welcome questions from my seatmates if there's questions on the details of that. But moving forward, I can definitely bring more detail to those updates on how we reached those goals. But if there's ever something that I don't cover when I give an update, please ask, because I'm always happy to answer. And if I don't have the answer, then I can touch base with staff to get that, so.
All right, cool, thank you.
And so this is just kind of summarizing some of the things we've talked about, that the RHC is making the recommendations on all affordable housing and homeless service funds except for CDBG. And then the ERP funds are separate from the homeless response system, and Commerce has authority on the direction of those funds. And that BOC has final approval on all awards and contracts, but is to give substantial weight to RHC recommendations.
Okay, that's the end of the slides. Any follow-up or final questions from commissioners?
Thank you so much for this.
Yep, it's a good
Putting this together
overview.
in such short time.
Yeah, really thorough, and there's more. The home fund has reached more things than I actually realized, so that's what this was all about, trying to get an understanding of that.
Could we do kind of, I think it'd be great to do a news article, right? Because that was a councilmatic vote that was passed by, it was me and Commissioner Menser at the time, and we're approaching the 5-year mark, and I think having the community see some of these capital projects that are gonna be coming online, and then that it would be just great of these are how your dollars are being used, right? This is kind of what the RHC has approved, and
We can work with our HSS media team and our new communications manager to put something together. It's great to do you're saying a 5-year update.
yeah, I mean, is that something that the board would like? It's something I would be interested in.
Yeah, because as you can see from that initial slide with all it gets kind of lost in the shuffle, right?
Yeah.
There's so many sources, and there's been new things with post-pandemic, that movement from 7 million to 35 and now 20. People get, the average resident doesn't quite understand all this. So to kind of look at the home fund, which again was a Board of County Commissioners generated, legislative act, seeing how that connects to things that they're seeing in the community would be useful.
Yeah, and so I'll say we do an annual report for the RHC, and we do have a blurb in there about the local home fund and what's been spent, but we can do something specific to make it kind of call it out a little bit more. We also have now our Thurston Regional Housing newsletter that comes out quarterly, that just came out a couple weeks ago. So I can talk to Lisa Sparkman about putting something also in the newsletter that is specific on the local home fund.
Good, I'm glad to hear Lisa's still working on that stuff. Haven't seen her in a while. Anything else, commissioners? Okay, we're back at 1:30 for commissioner check-in.